Everyone remembers the guy who hit the most home runs, the pitcher who mowed down batters like they were T-ball toddlers, the team that celebrated in champagne-soaked locker rooms while the rest of the league sulked. But you know who gets forgotten? The losers. The hapless, hopeless, head-shaking disasters that were so bad, you'd almost think they were trying to lose on purpose. If you ever wondered what it looks like when a professional baseball team forgets how to play baseball, the 2003 Detroit Tigers pretty much wrote the instruction manual. This was a franchise with a proud history and a big fan base, but absolutely zero interest in winning games that season. From the first pitch of spring training, you could sense something was off. The pitching staff looked like they were throwing batting practice. The hitters looked like they were using pool noodles instead of bats. And the front office looked like they were trying to tank so spectacularly that historians would be writing about it a century later. The Tigers kicked off the year with all the energy of a sloth on a tranquilizer. By mid-April, they'd already made losing look like a fine art form. Pitchers were giving up bombs left and right. Jeremy Bonderman and Mike Marath took turns getting shelled so badly that you almost wanted to call social services. Marath, bless his heart, managed to lose 21 games, becoming the first pitcher in more than 2 decades to cross that tragic milestone. When you think about it, you almost feel bad for the guy. He pitched 193 innings, which meant he had to stand on that mound over and over, knowing his defense was about to betray him, and the offense wouldn't save him. And speaking of offense, the Tigers' lineup was basically Dmitri Young and a bunch of guys who probably had nightmares about sliders. Young hit 29 home runs and nearly batted .300. Everybody else, well, let's say there was plenty of room for improvement. No one else cracked 20 homers or even flirted with respectability. The team's collective batting average hovered around .240, which sounds almost okay until you realize that was the high water mark. If you looked at their scorecards, you'd see so many zeros you'd think you were checking the weather forecast. As the losses piled up, fans in Detroit developed a gallows humor about it. They'd show up to Comerica Park with paper bags on their heads, joking that maybe the Tigers were secretly auditioning for a spot in the minor leagues. By the end of the season, Detroit stood at 43 wins and 119 losses, one shy of the modern MLB record for futility. And the remarkable part is that their complete implosion actually paved the way for future success. If Detroit was a slow-motion car wreck, the 2018 Baltimore Orioles were a flaming train derailment.
At an empty Orioles park in Baltimore today, the crack of the bat echoed like a controlled explosion.
This was a team that had been competitive earlier in the decade, making the playoffs, contending in the AL East, and giving fans hope that Baltimore baseball was back on track. Then 2018 happened. From the very first series, you could feel something wasn't clicking. Despite having Manny Machado playing like an MVP and hitting .315 with 24 bombs before the All-Star break, the Orioles couldn't string together wins. They were 13 games under .500 by the end of April. It wasn't a rebuild, it wasn't a retooling, it was a total, involuntary collapse. The pitching staff was an unmitigated disaster. The team ERA sat over 5. By mid-season, the Orioles were so hopelessly buried in the standings that they started unloading the few pieces that still had trade value. Machado was shipped to the Dodgers for prospects who haven't amounted to much yet. Adam Jones stuck around out of loyalty, but even his leadership couldn't stop the bleeding. The team ended up with a 47-115 record, the worst in franchise history. The Orioles' losing was so relentless it became background noise, like the sound of a dripping faucet you're too exhausted to fix. And the saddest part was, it didn't even feel shocking by the end. The players looked defeated, the fans stopped showing up, and everyone knew this was going to be the start of a long, painful rebuild. If you want to talk about long, painful rebuilds, look no further than the 2013 Houston Astros. These guys were bad on purpose, but that didn't make watching them any easier. In 2013, the Astros transitioned to the American League. The Astros pitching staff surrendered 848 runs that year, 60 more than the next worst team. Every game felt like a long, slow march toward the inevitable. Houston went 51-111 that year. But here's the crazy part, it actually worked. And yes, the trash cans helped too. But in 2013, nobody was thinking about parades. They were trying to make it to the end of the season without losing 120 games. Do you want a historical comparison to the Astros' deliberate tanking? Fret not. You don't have to look much further than the 1952 Pittsburgh Pirates. Back then, they didn't have draft strategies or rebuild timelines. They just stunk because they were completely outmatched. The Pirates' 1952 season was a masterclass in mediocrity. They finished 42-112, never managing to win 3 games in a row. Think about that. Over an entire summer, they couldn't string together even a tiny hot streak. You'd almost think the baseball gods were toying with them. Ralph Kiner was the lone bright spot, mashing 37 homers to lead the majors, but no one was ever on base when he hit them. The rest of the lineup was so toothless that pitchers didn't even bother working around Kiner. You could see it in the body language. Players slumping back to the dugout, fans slumping in their seats, and the front office slumping in their offices, wondering how it had come to this. The Pirates' only saving grace was that the season eventually ended. There was no miracle turnaround, no late push to salvage dignity, just a summer of getting stomped over and over until everyone was numb to it. And finally, we've got the 1962 New York Mets. The team was so bad that they inspired a book titled, "Can't Anybody Here Play This Game?" You'd think an expansion team might get a little grace, but the Mets took futility to cartoonish levels. They lost 120 games, still tied for the most in modern MLB history. Their lineup was a mix of aging veterans and castoffs who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Casey Stengel, their legendary manager, was at a total loss. He tried everything, shuffling the lineup, motivational speeches, sheer desperation, but nothing worked. The Mets pitching staff posted an ERA over 5.00, and they were outscored by 331 runs. That's not just losing, that's being completely and thoroughly overmatched. They went through stretches where it seemed they'd never win again. And when they finally did pull out a victory, you could see genuine relief on their faces, like survivors of some baseball apocalypse. And fans actually embraced the disaster. The early Mets were so bad that it was almost endearing. It was like rooting for the lovable underdog, except the underdog had no chance whatsoever. And even as they were losing night after night, the crowds kept coming. Maybe it was because everyone secretly wanted to say they'd witnessed the worst baseball team ever assembled. And that's the thing about these teams. Their sheer incompetence almost transcended sports. The 2003 Tigers, the 2018 Orioles, the 2013 Astros, the 1952 Pirates, and the 1962 Mets weren't just bad. They were unforgettable. The kinds of teams that make you appreciate how hard winning really is. The kinds of teams that make every blown save or hitting slump seem like nothing in comparison. Because at the end of the day, even in a league full of professionals, someone has to finish last. Someone has to be so awful that historians, sports writers, and fans will tell the story decades later, shaking their heads and saying, "Wow, that was truly something." Next time you watch your team blow a ninth-inning lead or lose 6 in a row or even finish in last place, remember, it could be worse, much worse. You could be watching a team that makes history not by winning, but by losing so spectacularly, the record books have to invent new categories. And for these 5 teams, the Tigers, the Orioles, the Astros, the Pirates, and the New York Mets, being the worst was the only thing they ever did perfectly. The ones who never figured it out. The ones who made everyone else feel better by comparison. Because in the end, somebody's got to be at the bottom of the standings. Might as well do it with passion.